Hey, folks, Eric Stacklebeck here. Welcome to a Watchman Newscast, another Watchman Newscast live stream. We really look forward to our live streams every week. We do these once a week, usually between 4 and 5 p.m. Eastern Time, usually on Wednesdays, sometimes on Thursdays, depending on my travel schedule. But today we are with you on Wednesday, March 8th. Wow, this
Did you
month,
know that
this year is moving very fast, right? Hard to keep track of everything going on. And you look up and wow, spring has almost sprung. And we're happy about that for sure. We've got people from around the world joining us right now, and we will have people from 6 continents. I like to say maybe even some penguins from Antarctica joining us from their phones. And it's going to be good. We've got a lot to talk about today and some not so good things, but we know that God sits on the throne. So at the end of the day, he is in control. So all of us can be encouraged as we talk about these events. Number one, we want to dig into what's happening in Gaza right now, and by extension, what's happening in the West Bank, which we call Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland of Israel. We call it Judea and Samaria for a real simple fact, folks, because that's what the Bible calls it. The world, the so-called international community, calls the West Bank. We like to call it Judea and Samaria, but there's a link there. And it's becoming increasingly apparent. One writer today in jns.org, a great site, jns.org, that I encourage you to check out, called this the new normal, meaning when Israel conducts counterterrorism raids in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, there's a response out of Gaza by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That's troubling, folks, and that is not trending in a good direction. It could mean direct conflict. And right now, there's basically a face-off on the Gaza border between Israeli soldiers and Hamas terrorists. It's not good, but mainly not good for Hamas and their continued existence. That's the silver lining here. So we're going to break that down. Also, you might be wondering, what is happening in Israel right now? These massive protests, a lot of social unrest there. What's happening in Israel? So we want to break that down a little bit and give you kind of an overview of really what's happening. More importantly, what the stakes are. Jesus said in the Gospel of Matthew that a kingdom divided will end in desolation. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Well, right now, not only is the United States, where I'm sitting, not only is this country completely polarized and divided, but Israel increasingly is as well. And what's troubling about the Israeli situation is something we haven't seen before, where even members of the Israeli military, Israeli reserves, are saying maybe we won't report for duty if the Netanyahu government goes through with this judicial overhaul. So a very precarious moment right now for the world's one and only Jewish state. We're going to break down why that's so problematic for Israel's security in a minute. Also, Russia, Syria, Iran, the prophetic implications of everything happening there. We just reported on the newscast yesterday that Israeli airstrikes shut down Aleppo International Airport. Now, folks, if you missed that, you'll want to see it. That was yesterday's newscast, Tuesday, March 7th. You can check it out here in our archives. Just go to our homepage, and right under newscast, you will find it. While you're there, be sure to subscribe. Click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. And by the way, not only YouTube, we're present, folks, across social media, including Instagram, where we're starting to really post some exclusive behind-the-scenes content. Check us out at Instagram, Eric.Stacklebeck. You want to follow us there, also Facebook and Twitter. But we're really going to do, the cool thing about Instagram is the reels and the video component, which really plays to our strengths here at the Watchman. So check us out there as well. But the Aleppo strike was significant in that Aleppo, number one, is Syria's second largest airport. But we broke down yesterday on the newscast, and we threw to a clip from our good friend Amir Sarfati of Behold Israel, who we interviewed here recently on the newscast. We talked about, and he talked about, the fact that Iran is transiting weapons into Syria right now under the guise of earthquake aid, supposed. Basically, Iran is taking advantage of a massive humanitarian crisis and disaster. Remember, not only Turkey was hit and hit hard in that horrific earthquake last month, But northwestern Syria, including Aleppo, also bore the brunt of that earthquake. Many people were killed there as well, and many buildings were also reduced to rubble in Syria. So Iran, one of the places where earthquake aid from well-meaning countries is arriving, is in Aleppo. Makes sense. It's probably, besides Damascus, Syria's second largest airport, and it's in the quake zone. Well, Iran, again, is taking advantage of this, or trying to, and transit weapons into Syria, again, under the guise of earthquake aid. Israel warned Iran about this about a month ago. Iran apparently did not heed the warning, and now Israel has struck Aleppo International Airport in order to stop those Iranian weapons shipments. So because of Iran's actions, it's devious. The Iranian regime, not the Iranian people. Key distinction there, folks. The Iranian regime, because of its devious and wicked actions, everyone has to suffer. It's not only like that in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon. This regime is the head of the snake for global and regional, in particular, terror. And wherever the Iranian regime sinks its claws into, again, whether it's Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Gaza, Iraq, misery follows. Folks, really wrap your heads around this. Think about this for a second. Do you notice a pattern here? Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and to a degree, Gaza are essentially client states, satellites of the Iranian regime. And what is the common thread running throughout all five of those regions? Chaos and misery. That's what the Iranian regime brings with it wherever it goes. Chief among the victims of that chaos and misery are the Iranian people themselves. Hey, look, folks, don't forget about this. Keep the Iranian people in your prayers. Those protests continue to rage. They're not as large as they were a few months ago, but there are still certainly significant, very significant pockets of protest throughout Iran against this regime. The regime has greeted those protests with a clenched fist, torture, arrests, murders even, the MO of the mullahs in Tehran. So don't forget about those courageous Iranians who are in the streets, and also don't forget about your brothers and sisters, if you're a follower of Jesus like I am, your brothers and sisters in Christ inside Iran on the ground there. Hey, Iran has arguably the fastest growing church in the world right now. How amazing is that, folks? Despite relentless persecution, the Iranian church continues to grow against all odds because you can't stop the gospel. It reminds me of Pharaoh trying to snuff out every newborn Israeli baby in Egypt, and yet the Israelites just kept multiplying, and it caused great frustration to Pharaoh. It reminds me of that in these countries like Iran and like China, where the body of Christ continues to expand against all odds, despite the best or worst efforts of totalitarian tyrants and regimes that try to keep the gospel down. You cannot stop the gospel. If history has shown us anything, it has shown us that. So keep the people of Iran in your prayers right now. But again, this regime just bringing misery wherever it plants its flag. And it's pretty obvious to anyone who has eyes to see and ears to hear what's going on here. Let's get into the situation right now in and around Gaza and the West Bank, also known as, on this newscast, Judea and Samaria. Get used to it, folks. It rolls off the tongue. Judea and Samaria, that's what Jesus called it. And if Jesus called it Judea and Samaria, needless to say, it's good enough for me. And then some. Okay. We had the counterterrorism raid yesterday in Jenin. Now, on yesterday's newscast, we did not discuss this raid because I was saving it for today. Again, yesterday, Aleppo Airport, check it out. But in Jenin, and someone, sorry, folks, to interrupt that train of thought. I'm looking at our chat, kind of right down the side of my laptop, and someone just asked a question, which reminds me, we're going till 5 p.m. Eastern time. Send your questions in, please. We will end up the last 15 to 18 minutes with a Q&A session here on the live stream. So, folks, please send along those questions for our Q&A. and hopefully I'll answer your question. This is what I love about the live streams. I look forward to them each week because it's more conversational, it's less formal, and we get to know each other a little bit better, which is really nice. And one way we do that is through the great questions. We have such an educated audience here on The Watchman. I love your questions, and I look forward to them. So I'm glad I saw that. A quick reminder, we have a very active chat going on right now, so which is very good to see. People from around the world, as usual, so love to see it. And hey, only God, right? Who would have ever thought that we'd be at a time where you could talk to anyone, reach anyone in the world? That's the times we're in right now. As bad as technology can be in terms of used for evil, it can also be used for good. If we can use it to advance the message of God, to advance the gospel, we can take it as believers and use it for good. What the enemy meant for evil, we can use for good. So I like when that happens. And that's something we're doing here on the Watchman Newscast. As many people out there who abuse social media, we're using it to reach people around the world with the truth of the gospel and the truth about Israel for such a time as this. So it's a privilege to see people from around the world tuning in. Welcome, everyone. Okay, Jenin yesterday, the counterterrorism raid. Again, I saved it for today. Do you remember last week on the live stream and on the newscast generally, we talked about those two Israeli brothers in Samaria who were sitting in their car. One was 21 years old, one was 19 years old. They were gunned down in cold blood by a Palestinian terrorist as they were sitting in their car. Well, for the past week plus, Israel had been hunting for that terrorist. They found him, surprise, surprise, in Jenin, which along with Nablus has sadly really been a hub for terror, not only in recent years, but going back for some time. Yesterday, Israel conducted a counterterrorism raid looking for the perpetrator of these murders, and they found him, and he was eliminated by Israeli forces along with 5 other terrorists in Jenin. Now, you might say, wow, mission accomplished, open and shut case. We had the same thing in late February. I believe it was February 23rd, 24th, when several Palestinian terrorists were killed as well, also in Jenin. Again, you might say, hey, Israeli forces got in and they got out. Mission accomplished, great job, terrorist eliminated. Now go home and that's that. But it hasn't worked that way, folks. We are approaching, again, what I said at the top, one writer has called a new normal, where every time Israel is conducting badly needed counterterrorism raids in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank, we're getting a response out of Gaza. And every time something happens in Jerusalem, we're getting a response out of Gaza. That response is usually in the form of rockets fired by Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or one of the various terror groups, Iran-backed terror groups operating in Gaza right now, to the point where when Israel goes in and does what it needs to do in a place like Jenin or in the Jerusalem area, Nablus, wherever, Israeli officials automatically anticipate a response out of Gaza. Israel right now, it goes without saying that Israel is always on war footing, essentially. But right now it's particularly tense because of the situation in Gaza, because you know that a response is going to come. I'm going to share the response first, but then tell you why it hasn't been bigger on the part of Hamas. The response was this: last night, one rocket was fired. A few weeks ago, it was several rockets. One rocket was fired. Thankfully, no one was killed. But then Hamas also laid a mine along the Gaza border near Israeli troops. Thankfully, none of them were killed or hurt. Israel responded by striking a Hamas target with tank fire inside Gaza. A few weeks ago, Israel responded with airstrikes against Hamas military and terror targets, kind of tit for tat. But why not more from Hamas and Islamic Jihad? Because this is becoming, again, the normal thing, it seems, where something happens elsewhere to their Palestinian brethren and they're responding because Hamas wants to paint itself as the defender of Jerusalem, the defender of Al-Aqsa, and the lions of Judea and Samaria and the West Bank. But you're not going to see, I don't believe, a massive onslaught by Hamas, at least in the near future. And hey, look, folks, anything could happen. I'm not saying this is with 100% certainty, because in today's Middle East, expect the unexpected. But it seems at least it seems, anything can happen, but it seems that Hamas right now is saying, we don't want an all-out, full-scale conflict with Israel. Hamas is still licking its wounds from its May 2021 war against Israel, where Israel did heavy damage, as we reported here in the newscast at the time, and I was on the ground shortly after that engagement. Secondly, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the other Iranian proxy in Gaza, was walloped by Israel in August 2022, and they're still licking their wounds. So both of these terrorist entities in Gaza are still trying to rebuild after getting a smackdown from the IDF. Right now, they're not quite ready to go all out and have a major conflict again. They're trying to replenish their arsenals and rebuild. The other major component to this is the Iranian regime. If the Iranian regime pushes Hamas and especially Islamic Jihad, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Iranian regime, much like Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, if Iran really pushes, then Islamic Jihad really has no choice but to throw its hat in the ring and attack Israel in a major way. And Hamas, to a degree, would respond to that Iranian prodding as well. It depends on how much Iran is funding and arming Hamas right now. It seems that that has certainly ramped up again in recent years. So in the meantime, in the short term, you would think, and again, nothing is guaranteed in the Middle East, folks. The only thing guaranteed in the Middle East is that one day Jesus will return to Jerusalem. That I know. That's something that's really guaranteed. But for the most part, expect the unexpected in the Middle East. I would think that Hamas and Islamic Jihad would look to hold out longer before getting into a major conflict with Israel once again. But folks, things have a way of spiraling out of control, especially in the Middle East. And perhaps, these are pinpricks. That's an understatement. When you're firing a rocket, it ain't a pin. These are incremental kind of death by 1,000 cuts type strategies by Hamas, firing some rockets, harassing Israeli soldiers, but not going all in with a full-on bombardment. Maybe Israel gets fed up. Benjamin Netanyahu is in office right now. He's taken a tough stance against Hamas in previous years. Maybe Israel says, you know what? This is not acceptable. If this is the status quo, then we're not going to accept it. We're not just going to weather rockets every other week from Hamas and just take it when rockets are fired at our cities and towns and someone could be killed. Not just someone, people, many people could be killed in a rocket strike or multiple rocket strikes. Maybe Israel says, you know what? We're going to send you a message. On the flip side, maybe Iran says, we're going to send Israel a message and prod Hamas and Islamic Jihad to do more. And again, things spiral out of control. What I'm saying is it's a powder keg, folks. And we're seeing, certainly, this has been going on for well over a year, an uptick in terror out of Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem by Palestinian terror groups, including a newer Palestinian terror group calling itself the Lion's Den. And now we are seeing out of Gaza what seems, again, what one writer called today, is this a new normal where all of a sudden, if Israel does something to defend itself or to go on the offensive against terrorists in Jerusalem or the West Bank, there's almost an expected response out of Gaza now. It wasn't always that way, but in recent months, it seems to be getting to that. So that certainly enhances the chance of another conflict in Gaza, let's be honest. And it seems to happen, folks, every few years, and there seems to be a major flare-up every few months. So while we are focused here on the threat to the north, certainly here on the Watchman, and Israel, needless to say, knows that the greater threat is to the north in the form of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. I've called it here in the newscast the coming Great Northern War, where Israel will eventually be forced to square off against those enemies to the north, Iran and Hezbollah and their various jihadi allies in Lebanon and Syria. Certainly that's coming. But as part of that Great Northern War, while the bulk of the action, if you want to call it that, will be in the north, there's a very, very good chance, better than average, that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, again, at the urging of Iran, will also get involved and create another front to the south. And there's also a possibility that to the deep south, the Houthis in Yemen would get involved. And then to the east, you have Shia militias in Iraq, which also might try to stir up some trouble and launch some rockets if they can reach Israel. They've tried to surround Israel with a ring of fire. We've called it that many times here on the newscast, where these Iranian terror proxies are armed to the teeth with rockets, missiles, and attack drones. So when this great northern war happens, there's very little chance that the terror groups in Gaza will hold their fire and stand back and just watch this all unfold without getting involved. Iran, look, folks, if Hezbollah, which is the crown jewel of Iran's arsenal, its army of terror proxies, Hezbollah is the big one. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, no joke, a serious threat. And just because I'm saying it's going to be a great northern war and the bulk of the fighting, the action will be in the north, does not mean that Gaza is suddenly, or the entities inside Gaza are suddenly not a threat. It's a very grave threat. Look, these are terror groups that have the capacity, and they've done so, to reach Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and beyond with larger and deadlier payloads. We saw that in May 2021. This is no joke. But Hezbollah is another level. 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of the Jewish state. 30,000, perhaps even 40,000 foot soldiers, many of them with invaluable battlefield experience now from waging war in Syria. A desire expressed by Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, to essentially invade Israel, or a mini invasion of northern Israel on the Galilee, and try to seize Israeli towns, God forbid, plant the Hezbollah flag, beam it around the world, and use it as a great propaganda victory. Even if the IDF comes along and wipes out that Hezbollah unit, 5 seconds of glory for Hezbollah, planting that yellow and green flag, snapping pictures, taking video, beaming it to Al Jazeera and elsewhere around the world. And Hezbollah are the lions of the resistance against the Zionist entity. That's how they will portray themselves again, a propaganda coup, even if they control an Israeli town or village for 5 minutes. Certainly Israel is well prepared for that. Hezbollah has telegraphed its intentions to the point back in December 2018, Israel uncovered Hezbollah terror tunnels going from southern Lebanon into northern Israel. We've talked a lot about those Hamas terror tunnels, but Hezbollah also had, I believe, 6 or 7 of those tunnels dug. And anything Hezbollah does is to another level, certainly. They spent a lot of years, a lot of hours, a lot of treasure, a lot of money on building those tunnels. I was inside one of those tunnels about a year and a half ago. You saw it here in the newscast and on the Watchmen TV show on TBN. Deep inside. I mean, folks, this thing was a labyrinth. We felt like we were descending into the depths of hell. That's how deep it went. And concrete, electrical work in there, wiring, they were ready to go. Lights, it was fully functional, and it seemed about ready to go. And Hezbollah had every intention of using those terror tunnels to mount an invasion, at least a mini invasion of northern Israel. Again, thankfully, the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, uncovered those tunnels, destroyed all of them except one. The one I was inside with the IDF, with cameras, with the Watchmen production team. Israel kept that tunnel open to show the world. There are visiting diplomats who visit that tunnel on a regular basis, journalists. Israel shows the world this is what we're up against. Now, sadly, the world, much of it doesn't care. And that's a sad, sad thing. But Israel just continues to fight the good fight and just pray and believe that the truth and that goodness will ultimately win out against evil and deceit and wickedness, the kind of which is coming out of Hezbollah and its Iranian masters. So certainly the South, hey, big threat. I would describe the Gaza situation with Hamas and Islamic Jihad as a persistent thorn in Israel's side. But Hezbollah is the big one, folks, and Israel knows it. And we made the point here in the newscast before, okay, if Israel is going to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, which I believe it will, unless something drastically changes, you're going to see it. There's more and more chatter, more and more talk about it in recent weeks. And folks, I said a few months ago when Bibi took office once again, you just have a feeling that this has some prophetic significance, this new Israeli government. Perhaps the significance is a strike on Iran. Benjamin Netanyahu, and I've interviewed him. You've seen my interview with Bibi here on the channel. He is 73 years old, number one. He could have rode off into the sunset, folks, and retired and sat on the beach in Caesarea and played with his grandkids when his grandkids eventually come. Instead, at 73 years old, think about this, really think about this. His family has been through the ringer. The media has come after them. The left in Israel put him through hell. Secondly, he knows he's walking into the buzzsaw at the UN and a probably hostile U.S. administration and the Biden administration, many holdovers from the Obama administration, which was undoubtedly hostile to Bibi personally and to Israel as a whole. Why would he come back for that? Again, he's 73. He's accomplished everything. He's been Israel's longest serving prime minister. He's a historical figure of great significance. Why come back? And the main reason is this, and he said it on camera, Iran. Folks, Benjamin Netanyahu sees himself as a Churchillian figure. He's a great admirer of Winston Churchill. I am too, by the way. I love Churchill. But just as Winston Churchill saw the gathering storm developing in the late 1930s, the early 40s, the gathering storm of Nazi Germany, just as he saw that when no one else wanted to see it. Remember Neville Chamberlain, peace in our time. Echoes of the Iran nuclear deal today, right, from the West. Churchill was ridiculed. He was called a warmonger and alarmist by members of his own parliament. And yet, he was right. He was absolutely right. Benjamin Netanyahu, for over 20 years, has been sounding the alarm about the Iran nuclear threat. He's been dismissed. He's been called a fearmonger, alarmist, sensationalist. It's not a big threat. The nuclear Iran can be contained, just as Hitler was contained. He can be contained. Hey, we'll give him Austria. We'll give him the Sudetenland. Maybe we'll even give him Poland. Some at least said, give him Poland too. Ultimately, Britain and France did not accept that, and that's how World War II kicked off the invasion of Poland. But there are many today in the West who would love nothing better and who are doing it now than to appease the Iranian regime. Netanyahu, like Churchill, said no, appeasement never works. The tyrant will only want more. What did we just discuss a few minutes ago? Iran spreading its reach across the region. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Gaza. The tyrant will only want more. The more you appease, the more they smell weakness, the more they take. Folks, it's a pattern as old as human history. You can always count on it. So Bibi's back for that reason. So do you really think now that he's got a golden opportunity, he's back, 73 years old, this is his historical legacy? What did you do about Iran? Suppose his government collapses, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and he's out of the prime ministership once again, and Iran goes nuclear. Bibi would be, I warned about it for 20 years, and now it happened anyway. Could you imagine how he feels? The stakes are too high. He sees himself as a historical figure that he won't say this on camera. I'll say it. Perhaps God has put him in this position for such a time as this. And guess what? It's Purim right now in Israel, commemorating Esther and the story of the defeat of Haman, who was an ancient version of Hitler. And the Iranian regime is a latter-day version today, not the Iranian people. I'm talking Ayatollah Khamenei, Raisi, and the rest, the not so dearly departed terror master Qasem Soleimani. These people are the modern forebears of the Nazi regime. It's a thread from Haman to Hitler to the mullahs today in Tehran who are running that country. Bibi sees it. Folks, he's not going to let this happen. And I've argued on the newscast, as much as Bibi has been out in front on this issue, I've argued on previous newscasts, when the rubber hits the road, I don't know that any Israeli leader would accept it. Even people more, I don't know about the left in Israel, but even a more quote unquote centrist Israeli leader, if they received intelligence that Iran was on the cusp of having the bomb, I think most Israeli leaders would act in that situation, because Iran getting the bomb, Iran, a regime devoted to your destruction, having the means to do so with the world's deadliest weapons, for anyone with common sense and a sense of self-preservation, that's basically a non-starter. Bibi, he ain't having it. You're not going to have a nuclear Iran on Bibi's watch. But you would think most Israeli leaders would also take action. Again, no guarantee, but most, you would think, would take action. But with Bibi, there's no question marks in my mind. He's going to take action. And if he believes the window is closing right now to take action, and many believe that, hey, the U.S. last week, a U.S. official testified before, I think it was before the Senate, that Iran could have a bomb within 12 days if it so chooses. There's all that qualifier. If it so, always that qualifier. If it so chooses. If it so chooses. Well, I think they've chosen. I think the Iranian regime has certainly made up its collective mind. They want the bomb and they're driving for the bomb. The only question is, when do they break out? When is the time right for them to break out and either test it and declare we are a nuclear power, or just declare it and say we're a nuclear power without a test, a public test? It's their timing. Folks, look, they've shown they're very patient. They'll stretch this thing out and stretch this thing out. Why do you think they want another Iran nuclear deal, the Iranian regime? Maybe it gives them another 5-10 years to just stretch it out and stretch it out, keep building up and just lull the West into submission, where the West says, we'll give you anything you want, just don't develop the bomb. And Iran says, sure, give us all that we want, and if you don't, we're going to develop the bomb. It's blackmail, it's extortion. Not only will we develop the bomb, we'll activate our proxies to cause havoc in the region and throughout the world. Oh, and we'll attack U.S. soldiers in Syria and Iraq as well. And when all is said and done, and the sun sets on the Iran deal, they're going to break out and develop the bomb anyway. So Israel's going to act. Unless, hey, folks, believe me, no one, and I mean no one in Israel wants that. If Israel had its way, the Iranian crisis, the Iranian nuclear crisis, would be solved by peaceful means. No doubt. Or in the very least, covert means. A peaceful resolution would be great. But you don't have peaceful folks in Tehran in charge of that government. Another option would be, look, Israel just does it covertly through cyber hacking and sabotage, things like that. Ultimately, folks, these are very hard targets. Some of them are fortified deep underground. There are multiple nuclear sites scattered across Iran. Ultimately, sabotage, cyber attacks, it could set it back, maybe even a few years, no doubt. But ultimately, I don't think that strategy will set back Iran's nuclear program to the extent Israel needs it set back. If a concentrated bombing campaign sets this nuclear program back even 5 years, then Israel says it was worth it. It was worth it. 5 more years to not have this looming, and in that intervening time, we'll figure out other strategies. I think Israel will say that's worth it. Now, the flip side to that is there will be a regional war, and which brings me back to the Great Northern War. Perhaps the Iran strike and Iran's response, activating its proxies, including Hezbollah, which, look, Iran has held Hezbollah in reserve. since 2006. Perhaps Iran says now is the time to activate Hezbollah. Hezbollah is too valuable of a pawn, too valuable of an asset for Iran to just throw out there in any old conflict. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, look, the Iranian regime has no hesitation in just sacrificing Palestinian lives left and right. And they've done it time and time again. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking Hamas, Islamic Jihad, although Iran could care less if those guys die and gals in those terror organizations. I'm talking about the misery and the suffering that every new conflict in Gaza brings upon women and children and the elderly there and civilians there who aren't members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, who are used by Hamas and Islamic Jihad as human shields. The misery brought upon those people by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Iran doesn't care. The Iranian regime doesn't care. Doesn't care about the people of Lebanon either. But it does care about Hezbollah. No personal, emotional care or feelings. It cares that Hezbollah is fully intact, fully functional, fully operational, fully armed to the teeth, so that when Iran does eventually decide to employ Hezbollah, it has lethal and lasting effect against Israel. That's the goal of the Iranian regime. Again, it has held Hezbollah largely in reserve for 17 years. That was the summer of 2006, that last conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. So these are the stakes. And again, very well, this Great Northern War, it could be spurred by an Israeli strike against Iran. What we could see, as we talk a little bit of prophecy or biblical prophecy, okay, Israel strikes Iran. You would think also, I'm not a military strategist. I interview many of them on TV, many Israeli strategists, American strategists I've interviewed and gotten their takes on this. People who've worked at the Pentagon, people who have worked as the national security advisor for the Prime Minister of Israel. So I picked the best and brightest brains on this. And you would think that if you're going to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, a sustained bombing campaign, perhaps, who knows what Israel has up its sleeve? Think of the Entebbe raid. Think of the various miraculous Israeli operations and victories and wars and conflicts over the years. So certainly where everyone's looking in this direction, Israel might throw a curveball, the IDF, and hit the nuclear facilities from a completely different angle. Israel clearly has great human intelligence and assets on the ground in Iran. Who knows where it's going to go? What we do know is this. There's a good, better than average possibility that Iran's going to strike back. And one major component to that strike back is activating Hezbollah. With that in mind, if you're Israel, and again, I'm not a military strategist, you have brilliant military minds leading the IDF. You would think if Israel has the bandwidth, the capability, that you strike Iran's nuclear facilities and preemptively strike Hezbollah as well. Surprise, preemptive strike. Concurrently, Hezbollah and the nuclear facilities parallel, strike them both. So you kind of blunt the inevitable Hezbollah response to the strike on the nuclear facilities. Maybe I'm completely wrong. We've got a lot of ex-military members out here who are brilliant, who are great. Comment, guys. Am I off here? It seems to, make some sense. We can talk about it in the Q&A in a few minutes. I don't know. I mean, it seems, I think of the 6-Day War when Israel struck the Egyptian Air Force on the ground in Egypt while they were having their morning coffee. That war was effectively over when Israel dismantled Egypt's Air Force. Could Israel have such an overwhelming preemptive blow against Hezbollah, where Hezbollah never has a chance to really get those rockets off the ground to a large extent? We shall see, I believe, folks. And I wish it was all peaches and cream and sunshine and lollipops in the Middle East. But here on the Watchman Newscast, we try to bring you the kind of information that you would rather know than not know. It's easy to be an ostrich and bury your head in the sand. And many of our leaders in the West, where I'm living, seem to want to do that. But hey, we're going to bring it to you straight. And if we didn't bring it to you straight, you wouldn't watch us. God has given us a mantle here on the show, on the channel. He's given us a platform. It's a pretty large platform now, by the grace of God. So we're going to tell the truth, and we're going to honor the mantle God has given us, which means we're going to bring you the truth and bring you our honest take on things. Hey, I might be wrong. Hey, I'm not perfect. I'm not a seer. I might be wrong with the way I'm looking at things, but I'm giving you my take for better or for worse. And along those lines, before we get to the questions, I did mention, let me check my notes out real quick. There were a few more things I wanted to share. Just looking down at my phone, pardon me, and shout out to everyone around the world who's joining us right now. Let's see. We don't have much time left, but speaking of Hezbollah, speaking of a house divided, I repeated that verse or that quotation from Jesus earlier in the newscast. The judiciary madness, I would call it, in Israel right now. Folks, I don't want to dig too much in the weeds into internal Israeli politics. In one sense, I feel like it's not quite my place. And if I'm an Israeli, I might say, who's this American telling us how to run our country? Because I always say here on the newscast, Israel is a sovereign nation. You have the Biden administration wagging its finger, the UN wagging its finger, the EU wagging its finger at Israel, telling Israelis how to live and govern. I don't think that's right. Israel's a sovereign nation that can make its own decisions. And as an American, I would get annoyed when other nations wag their finger at the United States and tell us what to do and what not to do. I say, keep your nose out of it, is my gut reaction. We're a sovereign nation. We have elected leaders, and we'll handle our business here. I appreciate your opinion, but we'll handle it. We'll handle it. You worry about your nation, and we'll be concerned with our nation. So I'm reluctant to get into internal Israeli political debates for that reason. That's why we talk here in the newscast more about the broader issues, issues affecting Israel chiefly, but that affect all of us. Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, and all the rest. The biblical issues, the great and wonderful things happening in Israel right now, the biblical lineage, God's land. But if I'm an Israeli, I'm saying, who's this 6'5" American sticking his nose in my business? Okay, we'll sort this thing out, the judicial reform thing. So a broader view of it, in talking to my friends on the ground in Israel, I was just in Israel 2 weeks ago. People on the right in Israel feel like the left has way too much power in the judiciary. It's not like in the United States where I'm coming to you from, where Supreme Court justices, for instance, they're grilled. There's testimony on Capitol Hill, and the president selects them. It's not like that in Israel. The judiciary in Israel basically selects their own, and there's not a lot of involvement by the political class, the Knesset, or the prime minister in the judicial selection process. So what we've had built up in Israel over the past few decades is a strongly left-wing judiciary. Well, this new right-wing government led by Benjamin Netanyahu says, we got to set this straight. This is a problem. So they right now are trying to push through judicial reforms and kind of reform that whole system where the Knesset, the political class, would be more involved in selecting judges. They believe that will even things out, and you'll actually get some conservative voices in the judiciary. I talked to friends of mine on the right in Israel who strongly advocate for it, for sure. Some on the left who I've talked to in Israel say, oh, it's horrible. It's going to destroy our democracy. I highly doubt that, needless to say. But the bottom line is this. Right now, it is certainly caused a lot of strife in Israel on the ground. And you have many left-wing protesters. I've been told the protests aren't all left-wing. It's a broader cross-section. Certainly many on the left are out in front with these pretty large protests, tens of thousands of people taking to the streets in Israel. That's one thing. Look, we've seen that in the United States in recent years. But here's what I want to talk about before we get to the Q&A, just for 1 minute, and why I think this is troubling. I don't want to say it's a new day because we don't want to see that, but what's troubling to me about these protests is now we have members of the Israeli military, in particular reservists, Air Force pilots, saying, maybe we won't report for reserve duty if you push through this judiciary reform. Now, folks, that's troubling because Israel has been such a unified country. Despite any differences, the Jewish people, the people of Israel will come together to face down external threats. It's one big family, one big tribe, is that they'll joke and they'll tell you. And they've overcome that kind of internal squabbling from time to time. You won't find a more free and democratic and open society than Israel, with election after election, as we've seen in recent years. This seems like a troubling new turn where, look, for the existence of the state, the Israeli military certainly has to be on one page, on the same page. So we'll see where this goes. But I will say that the enemies, just like in the United States right now, this country's completely divided and polarized. Trust me, if you don't live here in the United States, trust me, if you do live here, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Completely polarized. In my view, the left in this country is ascendant and trying to ram things down the throats of traditional conservative-minded Americans and Christians in a very nasty way, in a very combative and confrontational way. And we have complete polarization. Now we're seeing that in Israel. And folks, as we get to our questions, a broader point here. Well, what's the end game? What's the end game for the globalist type force? That sounds conspiratorial. Globalist, that's a conspiracy theorist. No, the Great Reset crowd, the Klaus Schwab crowd, they want to see one world government, right? They want to see digital currency, one world currency. Don't let them tell you that they don't want to see it, because they openly state this on their websites and elsewhere. In 2016, they thought the U.S., we've got it now. Hillary Clinton, she's firmly in our camp. She's going to win, yet Trump won. They were enraged, and right away he got in office. And I mean, from the moment he took office, there was an onslaught by the left and the globalist class, the elitist, against him. It's been the same with Bibi. He took office again in late December, was sworn in right away. The onslaught starts against him. Is this a coincidence? I look at the world stage, and at least pre-Joe Biden, I saw two fiercely sovereign nations in the West, in the Western world, that were patriotic, nationalistic, sovereign, didn't go with the globalist flow: the United States and Israel. Could it be argued that the U.S. and Israel are the two main forces standing in the way of the global governance dream of some Western elites? I think so. And I think they're happy as pie to see the U.S. polarized and struggling, and now to see Israel polarized and in some cases at each other's throats. Again, if you weaken Israel and the U.S., and Israel and the U.S. are governed by leftist globalist types who are all in on the Great Reset, then you've got it. You've got what you want. You've got a modern day Tower of Babel. That's what they're working towards, folks. So let's get to the questions with the time we have. And let's see, we have a few thousand people with us. This is great. Let's see what we have. Let me pull up the questions. Pardon me. I'm sure we have plenty. Let's see. 1 second, folks. Thank you for your patience. Okay, here we go. We've always got some great questions. Hey, there's only a few. Come on, keep them coming now. I love this name. California High Desert Preacher. Love that. Does the U.S. have anything to do with any of this? California High Desert Preacher, I'm not sure exactly specifically what you're talking about. If you're talking about the Israeli unrest and the protests there, the Biden administration would love Benjamin Netanyahu and his government to be gone. I can tell you that. And in the past, we've seen the Clinton administration under Bill Clinton in the late 90s, the Obama administration meddle in Israeli elections and supported and advised Benjamin Netanyahu's opponents. So never put anything past the American left in that regard when it comes to Benjamin Netanyahu. Speaking of California preaching, I just saw, folks, I mentioned it last week. I've seen it twice now. A great movie called Jesus Revolution. Now, we're talking about some heavy subject matter here. Jesus Revolution. I left inspired, encouraged. I brought my whole family. I brought nieces, nephews the second time around. It's a great movie. It's a great time at the movies. They don't make enough movies like this today, and I strongly encourage you to see it. You will leave encouraged. Jesus Revolution, it's doing great at the box office. It's a move of God. We need revival in this nation, in the United States. I'm talking about how polarized and what trouble we're in. Ultimately, the only answer, there's no political savior, folks, no political Messiah coming around the corner. There's only one Messiah. His name is Jesus, and he is the answer for what ails us. And if there's not a collective turning back to him, we're in dire straits. The late 60s, early 70s, the so-called Jesus Revolution, the Jesus movement is documented in this great film. The life story also, Pastor Greg Laurie, one of my favorites. So I strongly encourage you to check it out. And it comes at a time where there's more buzz about revival here in the United States. We had this Asbury revival and on college campuses. Generation Z, I guess you would call them. Hey, I have a 16-year-old daughter and 12-year-old daughter. And many in their generation struggle with anxiety, depression. They've got the gender madness shoved down their throats. It's a troubled generation. Much like that generation in the late 60s, early 70s, that hippie generation was troubled. They're looking for truth. They're looking for an answer. Jesus is the answer. Many in that generation found the answer in the late 60s, 70s, as you'll see documented in this film. And we pray today that Generation Z, as it comes to the end of itself, it's looked everywhere for answers and peace. It hasn't found it. It will find that in Jesus. So the timing of this movie, I think, is no coincidence as well. Check it out, Jesus Revolution. Let's see what else we have here. Judith Rothman asks, just wonder if China or Russia would help Iran defend itself behind the scenes. Absolutely. Yes, China and Russia wouldn't overtly get involved in any Iranian war with Israel. I don't believe China certainly wouldn't, but Russia ultimately, that was the second part of what I started to say. I kind of got off on a tangent earlier. We've got this great northern war. We've got Iran's nuclear facility struck. What's the aftermath of that? Does Russia align with Iran? Is that how we see the war of Ezekiel, the war that Ezekiel describes, the war of Gog and Magog? Is that how we see that play out, as described in Ezekiel 38 and 39, chapters 38 and 39? Is, in the view of Iran and Russia, the war of Gog and Magog almost a war of revenge against Israel after Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facilities and smashes Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran? Do Iran's allies, chief among them Russia, rally to Iran's defense? So that's an interesting question there, Judith. China, I don't think would be so overt, but certainly behind the scenes would arm Iran and certainly give public and diplomatic support to the Iranian regime, no doubt. Let's see. We've got some more questions and some more time. Randall Mitchell asks, Eric, why doesn't Israel just strike Iran now? Seems to me they will be condemned by other nations either way. Randall, you're right. They're darned if they do. They're darned if they don't, right? Why not now? Perhaps Israel, to me, Israel's had many smoking guns that Netanyahu in previous years has revealed to the world, including that treasure trove of Iranian nuclear documents that the Mossad was able to ferry out of Iran in the dead of night. Talk about a daring operation a few years ago. Perhaps Israel is just waiting for the ultimate, smoking gun where Israel shows the world we had to act. They were on the cusp. They were ready to break out. We had to do it. We had no choice. You know that the nations, Randall, as you said, the nations of the world are going to weep and gnash their teeth and howl when Israel acts. But Israel, nevertheless, wants to have as much on its side as it can, on its side to support its case for striking Iran. So I think Israel, I don't think they can wait much longer, but Israel perhaps is trying to gather all the intelligence, it can, to present a compelling case to the world. After Israel strikes, Israel can say, hey, look, you can be mad all you want, but they were going to destroy us, and they were on the verge. So that could be one part of this. And Bibi just got back in office 2 months ago. So he's certainly, since he came back in office, we have report after report that he's been meeting on a regular basis with Israeli defense officials. And that ain't a coincidence, folks, about Iran. Okay. Let's see what we have here. More questions. Let's see here, folks. Let's see. Give me 1 second as I look through the questions. There's a bunch and they're all good. Let's see. Wow. How do I weed through these? You guys are good. Man, oh man. Here we go. Judy from Canada asks, is there any new movement on the Temple Mount and with the red heifers? I think I apologize, my loyal viewers. Last week I said I'm going to dig back into the red heifers. I just didn't have time over the past week to follow up. We reported that story back in September here in the newscast. It had a lot of interest. As far as I know, there's red heifers. They're still in Israel. They're still alive. And I assume they're still being groomed, quote unquote, or so to speak, for that role to be ready for temple sacrifices. So I will follow up on that, number one. Number two, on the Temple Mount, pretty much the same as we've been talking about, Judy. Look, there is a growing movement among Jews in Israel who are saying, wait a minute, our forefathers prayed atop the Temple Mount 3,000 years ago. Why can't I pray there today? And they don't like that so-called status quo, needless to say. And they want to change it. They want to not only pray on the Temple Mount, but there's also a groundswell among other segments who want to see the third temple. Now, I said there's only a few guarantees in the Middle East. I said earlier, kind of tongue in cheek. The only guarantee I said is that Jesus will return to Jerusalem. No doubt. That's a certain guarantee in the Middle East. Another guarantee is that a third temple will be built. That's not Eric Stakelbeck saying it. I'm just quoting the Bible. The book of Revelation, the prophet Daniel talk openly about a third temple. Now, on one hand, Christians get excited about this because they're saying, hey, that means we're in the last days. I mean, Jesus is returning soon. Jesus is at the doorstep. The temple is being rebuilt. Yes. On the other hand, I encourage you to have pause because the book of Revelation also says that the Antichrist will sit in that temple and declare himself God. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there, needless to say. But that is coming. That is another guarantee in the Middle East. A third temple will be built. Jesus will return. Is there more? Is there more that I'm missing? There is more. Of course, Ezekiel talks about the millennial reign and different things. So there's more, but those are two that jump to my mind, certainly. Folks, we got to go. Sadly, I love the live streams with you all. Remember, hey, not only subscribe here on the channel, but check us out on Instagram, Eric.Stakelbeck, also Facebook and Twitter, but Instagram especially. We're doing some cool stuff on there. Thanks so much for joining us here today in the Watchman Newscast. Until tomorrow, God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.